Welcome back to Class with Code at CWM University. First, we're going to do a review. We're going to go over our vocabulary, go over some things that we have touched on in parts 1 and 2. And if you haven't watched parts 1 and 2, I'm going to show you which videos you can go back to, and I will try to link them here in this video. In parts 1 and 2, we learned that fractions, decimals, and percents are different forms that can represent the same number. So we're going to take what we learned and apply it to word problems and real world scenarios. The vocabulary the students will need to know and understand in order for them to convert fractions, decimals, and percents using real world problems are numerator, denominator, fraction, decimal, percent, simplify, divisor, dividend, quotient, equivalent, and greatest common factor. One of the ways for us to convert a fraction to the decimal is to turn the fraction on its right side and then divide. Once you go over what a numerator is for the students, what a denominator is, and the students need to understand that the numerator becomes the dividend and the denominator becomes the divisor, we could turn that fraction on its right side and divide. Now, as you see in this example right here, the fraction is turning on its right side, and once you do that, you can divide the fraction. After the students use long division to divide the fraction, they will get the decimal for 3/4. So 3/4 is equivalent to 75/100 or 0.75. It is very important that the students understand what the numerator represents, what the denominator represents, and what they become when you use long division. And once they get their answer, 3 divided by 4 to get 75/100, they need to know that 75/100 is their quotient. The quotient is the answer to a division problem. Another way that we can turn a fraction into a decimal, we can just read it out. If that fraction denominator ends in a 10 or 100, we can read the fraction out, and then the student should be able to use the place value chart in order to write it out. So for example, here we have 8/10. I will need to know where the tenths is in the place value and make sure I put the 8 in the tenths place value, which is directly behind the decimal. So then 8/10 is equivalent to 0.8. We want to go from a decimal to a percent. We can show the students how to move that decimal 2 times to the right. Now, if you're going to show the students to move the decimal 2 times to the right, you have to explain that that just means that we're multiplying the decimal by 100. So here in this example, you can see that if I multiply 0.75 times 10, I will get 7 5/10. And if I multiply that again by another 10, I will get 75. Therefore, 75/100 is equivalent to 75%. And remind the students that percents are out of 100. And 75/100s, how many hundreds do I have? 75 of them. Therefore, I have 75%. And then you can also connect that back to the hundreds grids. If I have 75 of them filled in, I have 75 out of 100. So that's 75%. So using the hundreds grid, you're building number sense for the students. I see the hundreds grid. I know I have 75 of them colored in. So that's 75 out of 100. I can write that as a fraction, 75 over 100. And I know 75 over 100, if I say it out loud, that's 75/100. I can write that as a decimal. So that's 0.75. The 5 ends in the hundreds. And then if I know I have 75 out of 100 and percents are out of 100, I have 75%. Another thing you want to stress with your students, and you should have gone over this with them this far, but they need to know about the benchmark fractions. If the students can memorize the benchmark fractions, converting between fraction, decimal, to percent gets so much easier for them. I'm not going to say that this is the mandatory skill. You can still use other things like dividing or finding equivalent fractions or just understanding that percents are out of 100. You can use those to convert, but if you know these benchmark fractions, it makes it easier. Reinforce every time that you teach converting between fraction, decimals, and percent, that you emphasize those benchmark fractions: 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, 1/5, and 1/8. You can also use 1/10 if you would like as well, but these are just some of the main ones that the students will see. The more you use benchmark fractions, the more they will see it and then start memorizing it. If you use it in your bell ringers or your do nows and just ask them, what are the benchmark fractions? List them out. You could also do a match. You can give them the benchmark fractions and ask them to match it to their equivalent decimal or their equivalent percent. If you keep doing this consistently, the students will automatically know that 1/3 is 33% or that 1/8 is 125 thousandths. They will see it so much that they will start memorizing it. Another good thing is you could put this on the wall somewhere where the students can easily reference it. Now, during testing time, yes, you will have to take it down, but the students will remember, oh, I remember the benchmark fractions were on this wall. And some of them are visual learners. They can basically visualize it on the wall and remember what those benchmark fractions are. So always use visual reminders or an anchor chart, something to help the students as they learn this concept. Now let's move on to the word problems. Word problems are usually the most, let's say, aggravating things for the students. Word problems seem as sometimes that they try to confuse the students. When you're teaching your students how to break down word problems, make sure that you're using the same strategies. If you're telling them to underline keywords or highlight keywords or circle them, make sure that you're demonstrating how you want your students to approach word problems, and you use this strategy consistently. Maybe during independent practice or while y'all doing group work, walk around and see if the students are following your lead so they can use those mathematical skills that they have and be successful at getting the answer. Let's look at our first word problems together. It says, in a class of 20 students, 5 students completed their homework. What percentage of students completed their homework? So the first thing I need to do, I'm going to label the denominator and the numerator, because I know that I have a fraction going on in this word problem, and I want to go from a fraction to a percent. So I'm going to underline percent so the students know that's where I'm trying to go. Now I'm going to write out my fraction, 5 over 20, and I need to figure out what strategy I want to use to turn this into a percent. On this one, I'm going to use simplifying, because I'm going to ask myself, can 5 go into 20? Can I count by 5 to get to 20? Yes, I can. So that means I can simplify by dividing the numerator and the denominator by 5. So once I divide the numerator and the denominator by 5, we have 5 divided by 5, which gives me 1. And then if I do 20 divided by 5, you can have the students count by 5, 5, 10, 15, 20. I have 4. So I have 1/4. Now with 1/4, I could divide 1/4. And then once I divide it, I take that fraction, I turn on this right side, write out my division problem, and I divide the fraction. I should be able to get my decimal. Now, granted, there's plenty of ways that you can solve this problem. I could have found an equivalent fraction and then got the percent. But you can show students different ways to approach the problem. In math, there's more than one way to arrive at the right solution. So once I divide it, I should be able to get a quotient of 25/100ths. Once I get my quotient of 25/100ths, I'm going to move that decimal 2 times to the right, because I understand that moving a decimal 2 times to the right is the same thing as multiplying that decimal by 100 to get my percent. So then the answer is, what percentage of students completed their homework? 25%. All right, next word problem is, a pizza was cut into 8 slices. Sydney ate 3 slices. What decimal of the pizza did she eat? So I know that I need to go from this fraction and move it to a decimal. So I write down my numerator, which was 3, my denominator, which is 8. And what I know about fractions, what can I do with them to turn them into a decimal? I can turn on this right side. Now, if the students memorize the benchmark fractions, they know what 1/8 is, and then they know the corresponding decimal, then they could just multiply that by 3. But if not, they could just divide it. So 3 becomes my dividend, 8 is my divisor, and I divide it out to get my decimal. Once I divide this fraction out, I should get a quotient of 375 thousandths. And so then the student would know that the decimal of the pizza that she ate would be 375 thousandths. So they can either divide it, or they can know that benchmark fraction 1/8, add it 3 times, and it will still come to the same solution. A basketball player made 18 out of 25 free throws. So I'm gonna underline that because I know that's important, and I need to figure out what percentage of shots were made. So I know that they gave me a fraction, 18 out of 25. 25 is my denominator because that's my whole, and the part I have is 18. So I'm gonna write the fraction out, and I know with fractions, I could either divide them, or I could possibly find an equivalent fraction. Now, I know that percents are out of 100. Let me see if 25 can go into 100. Can I count by 25s to get to 100? Yes, I can. So I'm going to find an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. Now, to find the equivalent fraction, I need to count by 25s to get to 100. And I know that if I count by 25s, I can multiply that by 4. And I reinforce with the students, what I do to the bottom of a fraction, I have to do to the top to keep it equivalent. So if I multiply by 4 at the bottom, I have to multiply by 4 at the top. So now when I do 18 times 4, when I multiply 18 by 4, I should get the answer of 72. So 72 will be my numerator. Now, I know that percents are out of 100. So how much do I have out of 100? I have 72. So what percentage of shots were made by that basketball player? 72%, which is a pretty good shooting of free throws. And this is how I will talk to students through the problem and how to get the correct solution. Keep in mind and stress this to your students or put on an anchor chart. To go from a fraction to a decimal, I can find an equivalent fraction and just write it out, or I could divide. To write out a decimal, I can always use the place value chart. And to get the percent, I have to keep in mind that percents are out of 100. Make sure that you're connecting that hundreds grid back to percents. Students will have something concrete to understand that why percents are out of 100, how you can use that to write a decimal, and to help you with your fractions. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Check and see if you're subscribed to my channel, because I know a lot of you all watch my videos, but you may not be subscribed. And subscribing to my channel does help me out. I would really appreciate it. Share this video with a teacher that you think it may help, or somebody who may want to learn how to convert those fractions to decimals to percents. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching, and you already know. Until next time, peace out.